Hello everybody, my name is Manuel La Rosa and today we will be talking about Ukraine's economy and how it can potentially collapse in the next few years. Ukraine recently came out from a long string of political problems with Russia that have greatly diminished Ukraine's overall production of goods. These problems have led to a very high inflation rate of 12.8%. Inflation is the increase of average prices in the country over a period of time. Inflation itself isn't bad as it promotes citizens to participate in economic activities by spending money on goods and services. In Ukraine's case, however, the high inflation makes prices rise too much and so families get poorer by the day. This kills economic progress as families now need to use more of their income for basic needs. Since inflation is high, workers are going to demand higher salaries to keep up with inflation. This causes firms to fire workers, meaning that the level of unemployment goes up. This is currently happening in Ukraine, meaning that the level of unemployment is constantly getting higher. To help explain this whole situation, we have here the economic professor of the University of Wakanda, Tomás Turbado. Tell us a bit about this issue of inflation.
Well, hi Manuel. Like you said, inflation makes prices higher during a period of time, meaning that salaries have to be adjusted to keep up with inflation. You talked about it here, but the inflation in Ukraine is making firms release workers, meaning that the workforce constantly gets smaller. As the workers get fired from their jobs, and as the unemployment rate goes up, citizens cannot earn enough money to have high disposable incomes. This means that now regular citizens cannot spend large chunks of their income in certain goods, meaning that those producers now have a lower demand for their product, eventually making those firms cut down on workers. This explains why their unemployment rate is so high in Ukraine. Let's make the distinction, however, that being unemployed does not mean not having a job. It is the state a person is in when he or she is actively looking for work but cannot find any. Although this definition is not the greatest, it does shed some light on how to analyze how unemployment and inflation relate in Ukraine's economy.
Yeah, the unemployment in Ukraine is whooping 12.8%. This means that 9.7% of the legal workforce is looking for a job, but can't find one. What are the implications of this, Professor Turbado?
Well, the unemployment in Ukraine is abnormally high, and it is definitely a cause for concern. There's three types of unemployment, but the one Ukraine suffers the most from is what's known as structural unemployment. This is a type of unemployment based on big changes to how the economy works. This can be seen in Ukraine when it passed from a communist economy to a capitalist economy. This pushed a lot of people with stable jobs back into the unemployment cycle. Structural changes like this have happened because of both inflation and a drop in production of goods. This is very bad because citizens have to use more money for their basic needs, but they are unemployed, so achieving their basic needs is a struggle. This drives other firms out of business and puts Ukraine in what's known as stagflation. Stagflation is when both inflation and unemployment in a country are going up. The real danger with stagflation is that it could lead a country into a cycle that is consistent and devastating to the economy. This cycle increases the inflation and unemployment, and it is appropriately called inflationary spiral. The Ukraine government has done a good job steering away from such disastrous circumstances, but if they do not resolve the issues they have with Russia, then they are going to have a hard time staying out of the spiral.
Now, this all makes sense, but why is the economy still growing? Ukraine is growing at a 2% annual rate, and according to what you say, the country should be shrinking.
You're right, the economy is still growing, but this is because of what's known as the business cycle. As you can see, a country's economy goes through a cycle, and ideally the linear line that goes right through the middle indicates the long-term economic growth. Ukraine doesn't have much long-term economic growth, as in fact, when we look at the business cycle of Ukraine, it is in the recovery phase, and it is barely starting to get better. The thing with economic growth is that if inflation and unemployment are not stable, it will eventually go down. If the government manages to stabilize inflation and lower the unemployment, then it would indirectly lead to higher economic growth. It is also in the government's highest interest to promote investments so that there's a higher flow of money in the economy.
So Ukraine isn't doing so well in terms of their economy, but they are super high in the list for economic equity. What is equity and what is the Gini index, Mr. Professor Tomás Turbado?
Equity is the idea of fairness in the fields of economics. This means that the distribution of wealth in a country is very fair. Everyone gets what they're supposed to. This makes sense in the context of Ukraine because they're coming out of a communist system. In regards to the Gini index, it is the numerical value that shows how equal a country's wealth distribution is. This graph is the Lorenz curve, which uses the Gini index to graph the curve. Ukraine is actually so good that it is almost at Sweden's level. Ukraine can be congratulated for this.
Thank you so much, Professor Tomás Turbado. It can be stated then that Ukraine is on the brink of terrible economic catastrophe, but if the government puts its attention on stabilizing the inflation and lowering its unemployment, then they will be able to dodge this and start to experience long-term economic growth. Thank you so much for watching the news.